To decide is to understand.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar titled Shaping Tomorrow, Exploring Opportunities in the Southeast Asian Defense Industry. My name is Nurimah Kurniasi and I'm a member of Media Monitoring Team at PT Semar Sentinel Indonesia. I will be one of your moderators today, together with my colleague Iqbal, who will lead the Q&A session later. Today, we will have 4 panelists who will share their fantastic ideas for our topic. We have Dr. Muhammad Hasmi Rusli, Joshua Bernard Espenya, Ms. Kuri Maharani Safitri, and Thomas Lim. This webinar will be conducted fully in English and broadcasted on Semar Sentinel's YouTube channel. Each speaker will share their ideas and presentations in 20 minutes. You are also welcome to submit their questions through Zoom live chat box or YouTube live chat. For any references to this webinar discussion, including screenshots, live tweets, or social media posts, we kindly request that you contact us beforehand through email at inquiry@semarsentinel.com. All right, before we move on to our main session, I would like to invite our lead analyst for maritime security and counterterrorism, Andi Raihana Ashar, to give her opening remarks. Please, Ms. Andi, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we delve into the exciting discussion today, it is my pleasure to welcome all participants and distinguished speakers to our webinar titled Shaping Tomorrow, Exploring Opportunities in the Southeast Asian Defense Industry. The evolving security environment has threatened the stability at both regional and global levels. Southeast Asian states are at a crossroad to reinforce their defense sector to face intensifying security challenges such as the territorial disputes in the South China Sea. Furthermore, non-traditional threats persist in the region, including piracy, armed robberies for maritime domain, and also illegal trafficking and terrorism. The ongoing Russian war of aggression against Ukraine is also a reminder on how a conflict is impacting the defense industry global supply chain, and why it has become essential to achieve a certain level of independence in the defense industry sector amid the global arms production backlog. The region's complex security landscape could bring opportunities for Southeast Asian countries to enhance their defense industry capabilities. As a matter of fact, countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand are actively modernizing their militaries through the procurement of major weapon systems such as combat aircrafts, submarines, frigates, missiles, and tanks. The development of defense posture of countries in the region are further emphasized by the increasing military spending in the past 2 decades. In this case, we should ask ourselves how we could seize this opportunity to expand the region's defense industry in order to achieve independence and sovereignty. Among many ways is through regional cooperation, considering the varying levels of maturity and readiness, such as partnerships, and how regional states could capitalize on existing, ongoing, and future transfer of technology that they are receiving for major weapon system acquisitions. In encouraging regional cooperation, Southeast Asian states can also collaborate with countries outside the region, which historically have provided significant TOT or offset programs. Involving domestic manufacturers in such strategic partnerships could also develop the defense industry's R&D capabilities. To further discuss this interesting topic, we are extremely grateful to have wonderful speakers such as Ms. Kuri Maharani, Mr. Muhammad Hasmi, Mr. Joshua Bernard, and Mr. Thomas Lim, who will help us to get a better understanding of the topic. I also encourage all of the participants to engage by asking questions in the chat box. Let's have a fruitful discussion together on today's webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you for the opening remarks, Ms. Andi. Now, without further ado, please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Muhammad Hasmi Rusli. Mr. Rusli is an associate professor at the Sharia and Law Faculty at Science University of Malaysia. He is also visiting or fellow professor at various universities worldwide. Additionally, Mr. Rusli also holds the position of Lieutenant Commander in the Royal Malaysian Navy Volunteer Reserve Team. Mr. Rusli today will share his presentation titled Malaysia, an Emerging Middle Power. Mr. Rusli, you may start your presentation now.
Thank you very much, and terima kasih for the invite to be here. It's such an honor. The last time I met Iqbal and Bianca, if I'm not mistaken, was in Manila a couple of months ago. Or was it? It was December, if I'm not mistaken. So it's so good to see you again here. And again, I would like to thank you for your gracious invite for me to join this auspicious event this afternoon. Okay, let me share with you my screen and we can begin with the presentation. Right. I hope everyone can see my screen. If you have problems with it, please let me know. Okay, all right. Good afternoon and thank you for participating in today's webinar. It's such an honor to be the first speaker, really, because being a first speaker, it means that I really have to make sure that my presentation is touches the benchmark so that when the first speaker can deliver well, it will also bring spillover effect to the second and the third speakers. Okay, so thank you very much for introducing me just now. I obtained my first degree in Malaysia at International Islamic University of Malaysia. I'm right now teaching as an associate professor at the Faculty of Sharia and Law, University Science Islam Malaysia, which is located not too far from the city center, about 60 kilos, not really that far. And at the moment, I'm teaching international law. And the topic that I'm supposed to talk about today is not really my area of interest. My area of interest is international law, but I will talk about defense from the purview of international law and law of the sea. Okay, and the title that I think can be quite interesting would be the position of Malaysia as an emerging middle power. And what I'm going to do is to bring you back, looking at it from historical perspective and until today. How have we developed ourselves as an emerging middle power? Right. Okay, what is middle power? Middle powers are, I think everyone knows this. Middle powers are states who commit their relative affluence, managerial skills, and international prestige to the preservation of the international order and peace. If you look at Malaysia, as a nation, before we get independence, we were ruled by a number of colonial powers, but before that, we were independent state. And what I can say is that we have never, Malaysia as a nation, during its pre-colonial era, some states managed, some pre-colonial states that Malaysia belonged to did not really become like a huge global superpower, but what I can say it's more on regional superpowers. For instance, Sriwijaya, the kingdom of Sriwijaya here. I know the main cities in Palembang, but they have also a number of cities along the along the Malay Peninsula. So this kingdom has a very strong ties with China because China at that time, even today, it's a strong superpower. So this was Sriwijaya, where Malaysia originated. We share a lot of common history with Indonesia. And after the fall of Sriwijaya, Majapahit came and ruled much part of the Malay world at that time. And one of the most influential kingdom was Malacca in the 15th century. And in 1511, this city-state fell into Portuguese rule. But it doesn't mean that the whole peninsula was colonized. Only Malacca city was colonized. And then talking about middle power, even at that time, the Malacca Sultanate sent envoys to China because we realized that the location of the Malacca Sultanate, of the Malay states, of the Malay archipelago, okay, where Indonesia and Malaysia are located today, it's in the middle of maritime crossroads between two superpowers, India and China. So it's crucial for the states, for these states to have good relationship with superpowers like China at that time, so that we can survive as a state, right? We can survive as a state to do to engage in economic activities with with neighboring states as well as superpower states like China and India at that time. Okay, so other than that, pre-colonial Malaysia have also endured centuries of war and resistance. Particularly, we have colonizers from within the region and colonizers coming from outside of the region. For instance, many states on the Malay Peninsula had to endure war against Acehnese in the 16th to 17th century. And Aceh is over here because they sent a lot of expedition across the Malay Peninsula. We can see a lot of places, particularly in Kedah, whereby the name Kampung Aceh can be easily seen because Aceh used to rule much of the middle part of the Malaysian Peninsula today. And other than that, we endured Portuguese rule from 1811 to 1641. This is only for Malacca. And then the Dutch, also Malacca, because the Dutch did not actually colonize other parts of the Malay Peninsula, just focusing on Malacca. And after that, the British, I think the British was the only power that managed to influence the whole peninsula that shaped Malaysia today. And also the Siamese, okay, the Siamese, the Acehnese and the Siamese were regarded as regional colonizers at that time. And there have been war broke out between the Siamese and the Malays in the past. And if you can see what have been mentioned by Sherrod Osborne, a British Royal Navy admiral at that time during the war in 1821, he said that not so the Malays, and we Englishmen should be the first to honor a race who will not basically submit to abuse and tyranny, referring to the Malays of Kedah who was fighting against the Siamese conquerors at that time. So it means that pre-colonial Malaysia, I'm not talking about Malaysia today, I'm talking about pre-colonial kingdoms, we had kingdoms, independent kingdoms, and we had relationship with bigger neighbors, and some relationship were more on economic ties, some are more on waging war. Many states wanted to come to the peninsula and subjugate the local kingdoms here. So the relationship between the Malay kingdoms of pre-colonial Malaysia is it depends on the era. At one point of time, the relationship with bigger powers are more on economic interests, and later it evolved into subjugating the local kingdoms under the rule of these distant powers. Okay, so and it doesn't mean that the locals did not fight back. They did fight back, but then again, the colonizers had superior technological military might that has caused the country to fall into colonialism. Okay, and then we gained independence in 1957 from the British. Okay, since we gained independence, we are now a middle-income nation. And we are aspiring to become a high-income nation. Actually, we were supposed to become a high-income nation in 2020, but with all the political dramas taking place in Malaysia, so it has been delayed to 2028. And one of the most peaceful nations on earth, indicating that we are a committed middle power because we wanted to use our influence that we have to ensure peace. And we are also a member of the United Nations that respects Article 2, Clause 4 of the United Nations Charter, refraining from using threat or force. But that doesn't mean that we must not develop our defense industry. because if you do not have strong you do not have military strength, then it will be kind of dangerous for the survival of the nation. Okay, right. And this is the list of the most peaceful nations on earth. Malaysia at number 19. Other Southeast Asian countries that is listed on the list is Singapore at number 6. So it shows that Indonesia is also one of the most peaceful nations, labeled as green. So it shows that majority countries in Southeast Asia, we are in support of peace. And yes, we also have one of the strongest passports in the world. Singapore being number 1 in Southeast Asia, we came in second. So it shows that we have been, by using our influence in a way that we managed to get to have good reputation internationally that allows our passport to be one of the strongest in the world at number 14 out of hundreds of countries out there. And in terms of military capability in Southeast Asia, this is not military strength, military capability. We are at number 5 behind Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Singapore. Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that in terms of defense, Malaysia is not the strongest in the region, but we do have certain influence. Okay, moving on, as a proof to show that Malaysia is committed to peace, in the past, we have disputes with many countries with regards to overlapping maritime claims, territorial claims and so on. And Malaysia believes in resolving disputes through peaceful means. For instance, in 2008, we successfully settled the Pedra Branca case between Malaysia and Singapore by the ICJ, where Singapore was being granted the sovereignty over Pedra Branca, while Malaysia was given Middle Rocks, which is like 600 meters away from each other, even causing problems until today because we have not delimited boundary lines within that maritime area. Sipadan Ligitan, we resolved with Indonesia in 2002. It did not blow up into violence like what happened in other neighboring countries like Thailand and Cambodia with regards to Sempor Preah Vihear. And even we have disputes with Brunei on Limbang, but we managed to settle it amicably. Okay, so in terms of committing to peace, Malaysia is a country that commits to peace, but we do have our own security challenges. Okay, for instance, we are a caretaker of the Straits of Malacca in Singapore. Okay, so why is it why does it matter if we are a caretaker of the Straits of Malacca in Singapore? It matters. It matters because, okay, Malaysia is a state member of the Law of the Sea Convention. Okay, so when we are party to the Law of the Sea Convention, we are abide by international rules with regards to ships passing through international straits or straits used for international navigation as how they define it in the convention. So when we talk about transit through Straits of Malacca and Singapore, where Malaysia and Indonesia, as well as Singapore, are the caretakers, these littoral states, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore, could not in any way impede, hamper, or impair passage of vessels passing through the straits. Okay, and these have been mentioned by these articles in the Law of the Sea Convention. And as you can see, the straits are very busy with navigational traffic, and there are issues that even military vessels are passing through. So what happens if a passage like nuclear-powered submarines or any vessels that carry dangerous substances passing through the straits? Do we have the right to stop the vessel from passing through? My answer is no, because we are subjected to the law of transit passage. And just to share with you, in 2021, there was an there was a US submarine that hit underwater object in South China Sea. It was reported those were oil rigs, abandoned oil rigs. The one that this US submarine collided. So what happened if that took place in the Straits of Malacca? It will, because we do not have the rights to put a stop on it, on vessels passing through. Okay, so if let's say accidents happen involving passage of vessels carrying, hazardous substances, there's nothing much we can do to stop the vessels from coming in. So therefore, we need to, Malaysia particularly need to enhance its military capability to actually supervise, or not really supervise, to make sure that passage of vessels through the Straits of Malacca and Singapore can be done safely without threatening the well-being of the marine environment within the waters of the Straits of Malacca. Why? Because Malaysia is not in any way has the right to stop the passage of vessels passing through the straits, as mentioned by international law. Okay, second is South China Sea dispute, like what mentioned by the previous speaker just now. She was right by mentioning South China Sea dispute. Okay, I think everyone knows this map, the 9-line map, and this is what Malaysia claimed, what Brunei claimed, Vietnam, Philippines, and the 9-lines that is claimed by China. Okay, and just to show, just as a perspective, how huge is the maritime area that Malaysia is claiming, overlapping with China. Let me show you this map over here. Okay, the area that is colored in red is the area that Malaysia is claiming that overlaps with Chinese 9-line. If you see, if you compare it with landmass of Malaysia, it is almost as big as Sarawak and Sabah combined. So that is an area, maritime area, that Malaysia is claiming in the South China Sea as part of its EEZ or continental shelf that overlaps with Chinese 9-line. And now at the moment, we are trying to negotiate. And when we use the term negotiate, many Malaysians were unhappy as if we concede the sovereignty over this area to China. But yeah, it goes more than that, right? In order to take care of this maritime territory, Malaysia should also enhance our military assets in order to make patrol along this area, like what other countries have been doing. Okay, so until today, Malaysia have not recognized the 9-line declared by China. Okay, so territorial and number three, this is the final security issues that I can share with you today because I'm only given 20 minutes. Territorial encroachment by the defunct Sulu Sultanate in 2013. Okay, the defunct Royal Sulu Army, the defunct Sultanate, okay, came to Lahad Datu, and there was a standoff between Malaysia's security personnel with these terrorists, causing a lot of deaths. And until now, this area is being placed as ESCOM, that enjoys a certain higher degree of security because of the threats coming from the Sulu, from the defunct Sulu Sultanate that wanted Sabah to be part of their territory. Okay, so if we do not have strong military influence or power, it's very difficult for us, particularly Malaysia, to protect the sovereignty of our land. Okay, so there are three issues that I've explained today. Us as caretaker of the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, South China Sea dispute. We do not only have overlapping maritime dispute with China, but with other countries as well, like Philippines, Vietnam, and also Brunei. Okay, and this is Malaysia's strength at the moment. Source global firepower. Indonesia has the strongest military in Southeast Asia, and Malaysia at the moment is number 7. So something has to be done, and that's why I think defense industry should grow in Malaysia in order for it to improve its improve its ranking as an influential country, not only in Southeast Asia but also in Asia. Okay, and as you can see here, with military might, it comes together with diplomatic influence. As you can see here, number 1 for global firepower is Indonesia in Southeast Asia. Number 2 is Vietnam, and the ranking remains the same for diplomatic influence. So I'm not really an expert of international relations, but what I can say here is that it goes hand in hand. All right. Okay, so that's why it's always important for Malaysia to ensure that its military is equipped and to be better equipped and its asset to be enhanced. So as a conclusion, like I said earlier, Malaysia has its roots from pre-colonial Malay sultanates in both Peninsula and Borneo. These sultanates had a relationship with various foreign powers. It develops from a relationship of, economic activities only, and then it became more of a war between two nations. All right. Okay. So and before independence, these kingdoms in Malaysia endured centuries of war and resistance against colonialism. Okay, and after Malaysia gained independence, we aspire to become an influential middle power. And in order for us to do that, okay, we have to ensure that our military assets are enhanced. Okay, our military technology is being developed so that it will be at par with those of countries having influence within the region or globally, so that we can protect our territorial integrity and maintain influence in the international arena. So Malaysia has to act now. And I think for the 20 minutes that I have, this is what I intend to deliver. Malaysia, particularly, is a country that is, it's a middle power. It's not really that strong. It's not really that weak anyway. It has certain amount of influence, and with good relationship with increasing its military might, Malaysia can become an influential middle power that it has always aspired to become. All right. So with that, I would like to invite you to visit my website if you wish to read articles that I've written on international law. And I'm returning the floor back to Miss Chairperson. Terima kasih. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rusli, for such a great presentation. From Mr. Rusli's presentation, if I may summarize, in light of the shared security concerns, it becomes important for Asian countries to foster a robust security collaboration, including in defense industry sector. Addressing that. Joshua Bernard Espeña. Mr. Espeña is an international studies lecturer of Department Political Science and International Studies at Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Mr. Espeña is also the Vice President of International Development and Security Cooperation. Mr. Espeña today will share his insights on Philippines defense industry, what went wrong, what is to be done. Mr. Espeña, you may start your presentation now.
Thank you, Rima, for the kind introduction. If I may ask my dear friend Iqbal to present the.
Okay. Selva, could you please help show Joshua's slides? Okay.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone from Manila. I'm so thrilled to be part of the panelists of this wonderful webinar. As a backdrop, I met Iqbal and the team Semar Sentinel back in Manila, together with Dr. Hamzi, when they talked about this region's maritime security. So I'm so happy to meet them once more. So allow me to present my views on the Philippines defense industry. It's an interesting thing, because as you can see in the front line of your newspapers, that it seems that the Philippines is now increasing its sense of agency. I've been arguing for months back that the Philippines is now increasing its sense of agency, at least at the diplomatic level, at the informational level. We're increasing our capabilities on that one. But it remains a question regarding its military capabilities. It's one of the ultima ratio tools of international politics. But defending your territory, asserting your place in this Indo-Pacific region would require you to provide a good enough defense industrial base to sustain whatever interest that you want to assert in this international system. So hence this presentation, what went wrong and what is to be done in the Philippines defense industry. And next slide, please. So I've been asked by Semar Sentinel to address three questions. Let's try to proceed with the next one. There are three questions at hand, actually. One, what are the trends, prospects, and challenges in Southeast Asia's defense industry, particularly of Manila? Second is, I'll provide my insights on how, please, the Philippine government could support their defense industries as a strategic sector, and what feasible steps can be taken to encourage the interaction, at least by the defense industry and the Philippine government. Let's try to discuss the first question with the next slide. Thank you so much. Next slide. All right. When we talk about the Philippines' defense capability, we have to understand that. Pass. Go back to the slide, please. First slide. All right. All right. Kindly go back to it. All right. So back in the 1970s, during the Marcos Sr., the father's administration, a long administration in Philippine history, we're not really a stranger to defense build-up. And in fact, one of the long forgotten history of the Philippine strategic history is that since the 1970s and 80s, we've been having this kind of self-reliant defense posture program, but it failed. Particularly, we had this so-called Project Santa Barbara. The Philippine Navy had a partnership with certain scientists here in this country, and due to chronic corruption, a lack of incentivization from defense industries in this country, just to sum it up, it failed. And because of the renewed geopolitical challenges in the 1990s, especially when China took over mischief reef in South China Sea, it compelled the Philippine government to modernize the armed forces of the Philippines. When the Americans left Subic and other military bases here in this archipelago, we were forced to think, or we were forced to go back to the drawing board to rethink our defense. And one of the results is to push for the 1995 AFP modernization law. But the problem is that across three administrations or four administrations, you have Ramos, Estrada, and then Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. Three only. I'm sorry. Yeah, three administration. The first AFP modernization elapsed. Hence, what are we gonna do? Not until 2012. 2012 is a pivotal moment for Philippine foreign policy because it was the de facto loss of the Philippines' presence in the Scarborough Shoal. And either side, whatever you want to believe, according, at least for the Philippine side, we have been deceived by the Chinese because according to us, it's ours and let us mutually withdraw, but Chinese didn't. So whatever narratives you want to have, at least the official story from the Philippine side is that we were forced out of this Scarborough Shoal, and it was a problem for Philippines defense posture. Hence the need to activate another, or at least renew the modernization program, and that is the revised AFP modernization program, which was passed in 2012, and and the AFP modernization had three stages: the first horizon, second horizon, and the third horizon. We're now at the third, but we'll discuss more about that. And at least the RAFMP as a law, as it was passed, it allowed, it opened opportunities and also challenges for the Philippines. At least for the opportunities, we were able to leverage our alliance with the United States and open for more partnerships. In particular, with the United States, we were able to talk to our American counterparts to at least let's have more items at the table regarding foreign military financing. And if you look at the board regarding this, what particular defense items you would want, at least we had the opportunity to talk what are the things that we want to have in our arsenal. And also we opened up many opportunities through memorandum of understanding or agreements with many countries, especially Australia, with Japan, with them as our foremost strategic partners. And we also opened more and more defense partnerships in regard to the opportunity for their defense industry to sell whatever defense item that they can offer, as far as it's in the Philippine demand of our force mixture, and it went through government to government deals. At least my point here is this: because of this revised law, we were able to open opportunities to talk about what is to be done with upping our defense capabilities, and that includes thinking about our defense sector, our defense industry sector rather. And what are the challenges? Of course, my argument is that it's not really about financial, but it's a mix of everything. And my point is that the challenge is that the lack of a coherence, a grand strategy, at least for the Philippines. My argument is that I don't believe that just because you have you're in the position of at least a middle income country doesn't mean you won't have any capabilities to think about your defense. When you look at the operational, tactical, and especially strategic level, it's always about thinking what sort of warfare you want to wage against the enemy, at least from the perspective of defense planners. And these defense planners would have to communicate that to their officials and then to the political officials. The finance shouldn't even be the problem. The bigger problem at hand for the past decade was that we lack coherence of what we want to have. At least that's the trend that I want to posit here before the Marcos Jr. administration. Next slide, please. It's really interesting if you look at the new national security policy of the Philippines. According to our new NSP, the 2023 to 28, according to that document, at least the incumbent government has now stated that we will look for a continuous investment and expenditure for the renewed Armed Forces of the Philippines modernization program, right? And it effectively provided an intention to revitalize the self-reliant defense posture. And that would mean in-country manufacturing, incentivizing the private sector in regard to shipbuilding and ship repair endeavors. And this would include also a joint collaboration on aerospace development, meaning to say that this government, compared to the past two administrations, is now explicit regarding the idea that investments on national defense and security should be made or should be spoken and talked about at the table, right? Which means there ought to be a national security review of military-related industries. Now, it's an interesting thing to think about. Why do we need to review all of these industries to build up our capabilities? What do our militaries want? What does the defense sector need? At least, thanks to the NSP, we were able to provide a defense concept. It's not really new if you look at our geography, but at least it's my appraisal for the current administration. Right now, the NSP provided a new defense concept for Manila, and that is what you call Comprehensive Archipelagic Defense Concept, or CADC. CADC enabled us to figure out what kind of modernization configuration do you need. It's what our Defense Secretary Gilberto Chidoro Jr. said as the re-horizoning, all right, the re-horizon tree, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we weren't able to purchase or acquire some of the defense items that we wanted. And it was a time for the Philippine defense planners and elites to take a pause and identify what do we really need. And I think that provided us enough room to think about what we want. Hence the CADC. The CADC as a plus, if I would say, would enable the Philippines to enhance its jointness, integrating the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, plus the cyber forces. We're now investing on, however modest, we're now investing on our space capabilities. We established the Philippine Space Agency back in 2019. At least we're getting there, right? As a rising or an emerging middle power, we're taking into account all of these operational nitty-gritties. Now, the CADC identified what we need. We need to enhance our command and control, communication, computers, intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition, reconnaissance, or C4ISR capabilities. We want to enhance our strike capabilities across the board, not just within the land territory, but the ability to provide offshore strike capabilities within the 200 nautical miles. We want to defend our exclusive economic zone, not just in the West Philippine Sea, of course, but also in the northern seaboard. If you would observe last January, we have announced our commitment to, put up more defenses in Batanes, and it's not about intervening in the Taiwan Strait. I'm sorry to say, but it's all about defending the long overdue, underdefended part of the area. Luzon Strait is part of which. So we need that. And also force support and force protection capabilities, right? So my point here is this. In the current administration, the plus is that we have now identified the capabilities that we need. This is what we want for the armed forces of the Philippines, so that we will be able to assert our interests in the region. But the minus here is this. All right, we have the SCAD-C. Do you have the capability to get them? We need the backward and the forward linkages of our industry. We need this. Hence the minus that I want to circle in, or I want to zero in this discussion. We need to get these, to sustain these, and niche some of these. Next slide, please. All right, let's talk about this concept. The previous NSP, at least by the Duterte and the Aquino III administration, they kept on pertaining strategic industries for economic development. The problem is that they were unrelated to defense. But now in the current NSP, we were able to identify that we need defense industries, not just for economic development per se, but also defending and asserting our regional space in this international system. And here's my point. We're on the right track, but my question is, are we doing it right? Are we walking on the right path rightly, if you put it, right? So right now, there are house, if I may, for the lack of a better term, there are house for a self-sufficiency. For instance, the presidential sister of Marcos, Senator Amy Marcos wanted the Senate to pass a self-reliant defense posture program. Under what premise? That is to pursue self-sufficiency, right? I think it's like you're thinking about this doctrine of North Korea, the Juche, right? Self-sustenance. We want to talk about all of the defense needs, the supply chains. You'd be getting it from your own domestic base. I think that's impossible. But at least the premise of many within the Senate and the House committees, we all wanted to pursue this idea of self-reliance under the premise that we want to be self-sustained. But I think we're not thinking right about that. My argument, like many of my colleagues, some of my colleagues here, is that instead of a self-sufficiency, perhaps we'll talk about selective sufficiency. Selective sufficiency, I'll just discuss later, but the point is that selective sufficiency enables you to identify what are you going to niche within the defense industrial ecosystem. It's not about this superficial statements about we want to be independent from this link of geopolitics. I don't think that's possible, at least from the defense perspective, defense industrial perspective. But there's another question. If you're going to niche some of your system, would you be able, to address the concerns regarding the economies of scale, right? And moreover, if these economies of scale would be considered, will they be able to become part of the, will they answer the defense requirements? When I say defense requirements, are they integrated to the joint and major services operational concepts? Right? And it has been my argument that just because you're increasing the budget for the defense sector doesn't mean you are addressing our need. My argument is that we need a nuanced take on defense budget. Let's just brush this through to posit my data. Next slide, please. If you look at the AFP modernization program, if you look at across the board, we have been one of the smallest budgets. We have had the smallest budgets across the board, right? It's of course understandably because of our developmental concerns, right? With the bread and butter argument. It's okay, no problem. If this is the money that you have right now, then so be it. But we need to take a granularity. Next slide, please. If you look at our data, there are several branches of defense budget: the personal services, the maintenance and other operating expenses, capital outlays. Capital outlays is the allocated budget specifically for the AFP modernization program, which is, and then combining all these three, that's the defense budget. For the past few years, our commitment has been on the personal services because, it's about addressing the payment for our, salaries of our personnel and also pension and for their dependents. Understandable. But I think if you want to look at addressing the threat out there, if that's the Filipinos, that's China, but just look at the AFP modernization program. How much has been allocated regarding the ability to acquire, the CO or capital outlay and to maintain these systems that you buy, the MOOs, right? It's not as big as you would see it. That's my point here. Next slide, please. And I attempted to the table one. The table. All right. I attempted to map where's the Philippines here right now. I think the problem right now is that defense budgets don't make sense of defense industries because governments want it to be cheap. They want it to be as cheap as possible. That's the problem, right? The Filipino perspective, we have this so complicated defense acquisition process because we want to get the lowest price as much as possible. Governments are too cheap. And defense industries, on the other hand, don't reflect the trends of warfare. Because defense industries are also concerned about, economies of scale, right? It seems that the government and defense industries, at least from the Filipino perspective, we're not talking to each other. We need to talk to each other. And my proposition is that instead of the Philippines being like a hodgepodge of technologies, we have to move towards selective sufficiency. The difference between selective sufficiency and a hodgepodge is that hodgepodge technologies is that you have a military with, for example, a NATO origin combat management system. And then you have a non-NATO combat management system, perhaps India, Russia, or China. That's a hodgepodge. During the Duterte administration, we attempted to insert some of the non-NATO systems, and it's been a problem at the doctrinal level. Overdependence is another thing. Prior to the Duterte period, we have been over-dependent to American technologies. We don't have an defense industry to produce our own. What I want is not self-sufficiency as some of my political, the Philippines need to figure out what sort of industry within the forward and backward linkage of our defense industry that it would like to reach, right? And hence the next slide. What are the feasible steps? Next slide, please. All right, the feasible step forward is to push for selective sufficiency. And to do that, next, can you go back to the slide? And to do that, you need to pass these two. We need to pass the Philippine Defense Industry Act, or PDIDA, and also pass, or at least publish the implementing rules and regulations of PDIDA law, and as well as the passage of the Special Defense Economic Zone Act, or SPEDEZA, right? We need these laws in order to provide an enabling law to spur production, growth, and sustainment of our niche systems. If that's going to be the focus, right? The whole design of your ships, right? We have to support that particular industry, right? We cannot suggest the idea that we're going to be self-sustainable to all parts of the defense items. We cannot do that. If that is the case, we need to talk about the MOE and the CO, defense allocation budget, that should be streamlined to this selective sufficiency. Are we going to do that in terms of, if that's the case, we need a forward and a backward linkage of our defense industries. Should we collab with ASEAN states, for instance, the boosted heavy industries of Malaysia or ST engineering of Singapore? I don't know. If you're going to do this, we need to address, for instance, intellectual property negotiations. You need all of these things in order to push forward. And you also have to, and if ASEAN countries would want to talk to the Philippine government, you have to understand our defense procurement process. We have a long history of a complicated defense acquisition. I think, as far as I'm knowledgeable, at least the ideal timeline of any defense acquisition should be less than 2 years. Do bidders have that patience? I think we have that patience. If we're gonna talk about the submarine project or the multi-role fighter acquisition project, I think bidders are so much patient, but there are problems. Why are we getting into this point? Right? And defense companies don't have a choice but to wait for its customer in the Philippines, right? So ASEAN has to understand that context. If not, the risk, at least an opportunity for us, if Southeast Asian defense industries won't be able to collaborate with us, well, it's no problem for the Philippines because we might be able to look for other like-minded states. That's the risk for Southeast Asia. You might lose another opportunity to link, your defense industries, the backward and the forward defense industry linkage. We might want to think about how would ASEAN provide an integrated forward and linkage defense industry in this regard. But of course, this is one of the challenges. Southeast Asia is one of the most complex regions with diverging national interests and national economic development concerns. So I think with that, I rest my case. I'm looking forward to our discussions later. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Espina, for the very valuable presentation. If I may summarize, Mr. Espina mentioned that there are a number of questions that must be answered when we discuss defense industry collaboration in ASEAN, such as fiscal capacity, economies of scale, and differences in industrial capabilities in each country. Nevertheless, there is a real need and opportunity for Asian nations to cooperate in the defense industry sector, especially as many countries in the region, including the Philippines, who is currently attempting to modernize their armed forces. All right, I have a short reminder for those who just joined our webinar midway. Welcome, and we will have our Q&A session later. We will try to get through as many questions as possible. In the meantime, should you have any questions, please submit them through the Zoom chat box or the live comment section or on Semar Sentinel's YouTube channel. All right, for our next speaker, we have Ms. Kuri Maharani Savitri. Ms. Kuri is a lecturer at the International Relations Department of Bina Nusantara University. Previously, Ms. Kuri also worked with the Strategic Industrial Working Group and High-Tech at the National Industry Economic Committee, as well as assisting the Defense Industrial Policy Committee and the National Development Planning Agency at the Indonesian Ministry of Defense. And her presentation today titled In Search for Asian Defense Industry Collaboration Opportunity. Ms. Kuri, we welcome you to begin the session.
Thank you, Ms. Nurima, for the opportunity. Semar Sentinel, thanks again for inviting me. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, Ms. Kuri, we can hear you.
Okay. I think it's about the time that Semar Sentinel gives me a membership card, considering the amount of times you have given me to participate in your webinar. And as always, I applaud the selections of topics which I believe to be very relevant and timely, considering some of the current trends at global, regional, and national. Thank you for the previous speakers who have delivered such a insightful presentation. We have taken some notes from our colleagues from the Philippines and Malaysia. And I apologize that I missed the first presentation, but hopefully I can catch up with you with the recording or YouTube streaming later on. My presentation would be on Indonesia, of course, but allow me to open up with the view of the challenges faced by defense industries in Southeast Asian countries. Okay, organizer, could you help me to share screen my presentation? Thank you. Okay, it is expected that I will deliver something of a review of what are the trends of global, regional, and national for defense industries. And then what is the prospect? We'll focus that on Indonesia as well as some sort of qualification interests with considerable defense industries. And then the challenges of policy institutions, the program, yeah. And then finally, I will deliver some country recommendation. Let's start with global challenge. Okay, let's start with global challenge. Can you make the slide, please? Next one. Next one. But currently in the office, I'm not able to speak very loud. But moderator, you can always remind me if I speak to Sophia. Okay, we are facing the world that is changing, and especially for the defense industry, this changing has considerable impact to Southeast Asian countries, not only those with defense industry, but also those without considerable defense industry. The first is there is rise in demands of some medium and big powers here. Medium powers in Europe, for example, NATO increased import by 55% after the Ukraine war. And then for Middle East and big power in Asia, especially those in East Asia, we're talking about China, Japan, South Korea, and also Taiwan, yeah. The import increased 29% over the last years. And then we heard the news of the US will support Taiwan's defense, yeah, by sending arms worth $3 billion, yeah. And then we can see that here, so these Asia countries import decreased 32%, yeah, over the same period, yeah, which is in contrast with development at the global and also at the regional. And another thing of the global challenges is technology decoupling. After the World War, we also used the globalization in arms production, whereby the big defense industries from supplying countries, they market their arms and they even offer your sweetener, as offsets, compensation when we import and export. There is a demand for offsets, for example, in form of transport technology. But then, in this era, we face not the continuation of globalization in its production, but the contrast, which is the technology decoupling. Yeah. This is marked by the limitation or restriction to technology access, such as counter American industries through Sanction Act, an act issued by the US in 2017, and then to Russia, Iran and North Korea. And then again, the US issued another act, which is called US Chips and Science Act in 2022, and to prevent China from getting the strategic materials for them to develop their industries. And so on, and so on. Many actions have been taken by the big powers to restrict the transfers of weapons as well as the transfer of as hardware, yeah, and also the software. And this will bring negative impact to us in Southeast Asian countries, which has an ASEAN defense industries, yeah, and we need to develop our defense industries further. We cannot depend on our own technology, but we also combine it with partnership, yeah, with some foreign countries, and this technology decoupling and restrictions of technology access is a challenge for us. And then the other impact to the defense industry is that we see changes in the rank of defense exporting countries. For example, Russia's share of global arms have fell quite considerably. Yeah, and then we have US and France stepping in to replace market left by the Russia, yeah, and then we see South Korea also spoiled big numbers of contracts, yeah, especially with last year's compared to Poland. Yeah. Next. So this trends, yeah, global trends, is that Southeast Asian in lots of ways. The first is we see that 6 Southeast Asian countries are the users of Russian arms, and therefore now, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, yeah, we are facing challenges in the maintenance and modernization of our Russian inventories. And then we also have 8 Southeast Asian countries as user of Chinese arm, yeah, and they are potentially affected by the US restriction to China. Yeah. But we also see opportunity. For example, here we cite the news about Malaysia accounted for 20% of US goods imports here into the US year. And we see that 5 Southeast Asian countries actually increase export of same like manufacturers to the US. So I guess each challenges also comes with opportunity. Next. However, how do we respond to these challenges, yeah, in regional affairs? We see that there are different contexts for Southeast Asia, although we are close to each other, yeah, we are in the same region, we have different approach for different defense organizations. We have different drivers, yes. For Thailand, it's more internal drivers, mobilization for Indonesia, yeah, it is quite balanced, internal and external. For Philippines, as previously discussed by our speakers, yeah, the external drivers seem to be more dominant, yeah, in the country defense organization. And then there's also the issue of geography. Some of these Southeast Asian are maritime and some others are continental. And this affects the modernization practice. For example, like Indonesia and Philippines, yeah, we are maritime countries and therefore we are focusing on naval power. The acquisition is, for example, the anti-ship missile, yeah, and then warship, yeah. We are still working for the Philippines to introduce their submarines, yeah. You see that submarine is one of the popular defense equipment, yeah, introduced by these Asian countries in the last decade. So these Asian countries, based on different concepts, they produce different trajectories of defense mobility. And we see that Singapore is the most advanced, yeah. But Vietnam achieved the most progress in naval power. Yeah, here I cited some of the writings, yeah, from my colleagues. Yeah, I forgot to refer to first. I will send it to the organizers later. Yeah, if you're interested in the papers. Next. So this is the compilations of different economy facts in countries in Southeast Asia, and we see that by comparing seven Southeast Asian countries, we see that actually most of Southeast Asia, they don't really prioritize defense modernization. For different reasons, Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam actually reduced the amount of their arms imports here. For Indonesia, because we're focusing on COVID, and then for Vietnam, because they are battling with the anti-corruption, and then for Myanmar, because of the pressures, international pressures, and the embargo, The Philippines and Thailand are the outliers here. Philippines has increased the arms import to 143%, 1.5 times. And then Thailand for 20%, in the past decade. And then we see that the main suppliers of Southeast Asian countries are actually more or less the same countries. We bought from France, United States, and trade from some European countries. Some others also are relying on Eastern technology like from China and Russia. So next. So here I extract the article that I published last year in Contemporary Southeast Asia. I will also send the articles to the organization. Here we can see that the ASEAN countries, they have several consideration in arms spectrum decision making, and each country can combine some of this consideration. And in arms collaboration, we have different approach here. For example, in Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, we started to choose the path for joint development with foreign countries. And Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and Myanmar. In Myanmar, we started to use offsets. Offset is actually not a new thing for these Asian countries. We have been practicing it for more than 2 decades. And then other Asian countries opt to buy. For example, Brunei, Cambodia, and Timor-Leste. And other Southeast Asian countries prefer to buy, and then we demand for transfer of technology in the form of creation of maintenance and repair and overhaul capacity within the national territory. So with this different decision making and different strategy in arms procurement, we question about the ASEAN collaboration. The idea of Asian collaboration is further complicated with our different choices of preference for partners. For example, the Singapore, Brunei, and Philippines prefer the Western technology, and then the Cambodia, Laos prefer the Eastern technology, and then there are also countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar that prefers diversified suppliers. And so this I just want to show you that based on this, the idea of arms collaboration in ASEAN seems to be a complex issue, and Asian Defense Industrial Corporation, have been started in 2011, but we see that there is no significant progress until now, and we have to think of other ways to proceed here from the different strategy or different partners. Next. Okay. I'm not going to discuss about this here. I think I will just go straight to discuss about Indonesia. Can you move to slide 10, please? Can we move to slide 10? Indonesia defense economy. Okay. So our colleagues previously have mentioned about the nature of the Southeast Asian countries that we actually lost peace. None of us want, of course, to have military issues with each other here. I think we need to underline that the defense industries in Southeast Asia is actually projected to fulfill our internal needs, for our defensive purposes. However, this also means that the defense industries of the region will find it hard to expand and to be competitive, because in order to be competitive, you have to attain a certain level of skill, and as small and medium-sized countries, with small and medium budgets, defense economy, it is difficult, to expect that our defense industry will be as competitive as the more advanced countries in the world. Here we see that Indonesia, as the largest economy in Southeast Asia, we have been constantly under budgeting. Indonesia defense budget as percentage is one of the lowest in Southeast Asia. Okay, in Southeast Asia, and then we are consistently underspending, and therefore we don't have enough demand for the industry. In addition, the Indonesia is also lacking in what we call defense integrity. If you see the research done by the Transparency International in 2022, in 2020, Indonesia is considered as high-risk country when it comes to corruption risk in defense. Next. Okay. So Indonesia actually have the largest share of indigenous defense procurement. Here you can see that the percentage of Indonesia's defense procurement from domestic industry is the highest among all Southeast Asian countries. However, Indonesia also diversify the type and sources of defense equipment. Next. What are the opportunities for the industry? If we see here the age of weapons in Indonesia, the average of age of weapons in Indonesia at the moment currently is 34 years, and the age of 9 category of major conventional arms are ranging. You can see that the younger is the red here. Sorry, the younger is the younger is on the left here, 1 to 9, and then the oldest is the right one, or more than 60. And we see that the most the highest number of defense equipment should be marked with green color here. So we see, for example, aircraft. Most of Indonesian aircraft are in the group of 10 to 19 years old. And then we see the armored vehicle, 7 types of armored vehicles are actually more than 60 years old. So based on this age of weapons, next, we can see the combat readiness, that Indonesia's aging and obsolete weapon system are actually dominating, which means that we need to modernize this, whether it's through upgrading or to replacement with new weapon system. Next. Next. Okay. So this is the Indonesian defense industry in 2021. I would like to apologize. I jumped at the news of defense, but apparently they haven't issued a updated assessment of Indonesian defense industry. And here you can see that most of Indonesian industries are private, defense industries. And then Indonesia has low level of R&D, only 1 to 2% of defense budget. We are also troubled with aging workforce and low and medium skill workers. And also the locations of all the defense industries also centralized in Java. And this will be a problem because within the next 20 years we're going to move our capital city to Kalimantan, which is in Malaysia. And therefore we need support of defense industry in that dimension as well. Next. And here you can see that the characters of defense industry in India is majority values, only 31% depends on defense market, and it is dominated by shipbuilding. The local supply chain is low, and the defense sector in Indonesia is only 9%, which attract the level of local content that Indonesia would achieve, or the level of independence. Next. In 2021, the government decided that all the state defense industry will be merged into one under a holding company named Defense ID. Next. And this is the area where Indonesia want to be independent. We have 10 priority programs. We have, for example, the newer addition is the AV and cyber, in addition to the conventional platform, such as the fighters, jet, and the submarines, as well as missile. And the progress of each of this program is varied, we recently heard that there's been success in the missile program, so the consortium for the missile have transferred the license to the defense industry so that they can start the production. Next. So here is the long-term plan from the Ministry of State-owned companies. So after the holding company is created and the national program is achieved, the government now is trying to make use of long-term contracts, and big size procurement. For example, we recently inked agreement to purchase 32 Rafale fighters conference, and then if I'm not mistaken, 13 of this radar, in the college, and using this, we could elevate our beginning position, to ask for the money from the supplier, for transfer of technology in form of, for example, from the Rafale procurement, we ask for data level of maintenance capability. So we're not asking for production in Indonesia, but we are demanding for maintenance capability so that we can be self-sufficient in the operational of the cycle. And finally, the government continues support for working capital, which is very important for the
Miss Kuri. It seems like there's a connection issue on Miss Kuri's side. Okay, while we're waiting for Miss Kuri to come back, I would like to remind who just joined us midway. We will open the Q&A session after all of our panelists deliver their presentations. So if you have any questions, you can submit them via the Zoom chat box or our YouTube live chat comment section. Also, don't forget to include your name and institutions. While we're waiting, I think it would be best if we move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker, we have Mr. Thomas Lim. Mr. Thomas Lim, are you ready?
Yep.
All right. So Mr. Thomas Lim is a senior analyst with the Military Studies program of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, or RSIS. Prior to joining RSIS, he was the chief trainer of ST Engineering's Armored Vehicle Driving Training Project. For today's presentation, Mr. Lim will talk about a Singapore perspective, the Southeast Asian defense industry. Mr. Lim, you may start your presentation now.
All right. First of all, I hope everybody can hear me. Good afternoon. My name is Thomas. I'm from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. I'm with the Military Studies program. So basically what we do is we conduct international relations lessons on military studies and international relations for the Singapore Armed Forces. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Please give me a second. All right. I hope everyone can see my screen. Just checking.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, great. Okay, so yeah, as you can see, I'm really looking at this the issue of today from a Singapore perspective. My email is there, so please feel free to contact me if anything, if there are any questions, right? Okay, so it's a simple outline. I'll kind of introduce the lay of the land, introduce myself, and I'll talk about perhaps a Singaporean perspective on our defense industry, our defense, and of course, we have to talk about the Singapore Armed Forces. And afterwards, I'll talk about some technological developments, conceptual frameworks, bigger arguments, and afterwards, we will talk about some prospects and challenges as per the guidelines, right? So it's, let me start by saying this. I think that it is, we are in particularly tenuous times. I think we see the China and Philippines situation, the South China Sea. There are various other regional flashpoints that have popped up. So I think it's all more important that, at least for Southeast Asia, of course, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, included in this equation. I think there is a need to look at the defense industry and think about how we can perhaps further improve our defense capabilities and our militaries, right? Okay, so just a quick introduction. I'm part of the Military Studies program. Like I mentioned just now, we basically conduct leadership courses for the Singapore Armed Forces. So all the way from the officer cadet schools, all the way upwards to the command staff colleges. And we teach across the entire field of strategic and military studies. So military history, military theory, air power, sea power, and typical international relations, and geopolitics, as well as foreign policy, right? Okay, so my background, of course, both my bachelor's and master's are in international relations. Before I went to my current position, I worked with ST Engineering, which is one of the leading defense companies in Singapore and perhaps in the region. Basically, what my job was, that I would teach the SA trainees from the Singapore Armed Forces on how to drive Singapore's armored vehicles. So the Bionics, the Bronco, the BB206s, the Leopard 2SGs, the Ultras, and of course the recent Hunters, some of which some of you guys might be familiar with, right? So that's just a simple background on me. All right, okay, just starting off the presentation proper. So really a Singaporean perspective on, defense, right? So I think before we perhaps go into the details, it's important to understand Singapore's context, right? I think most of you guys will be familiar with how Singapore, of course, colloquially named the little, colloquially called the little red dot in the past, right? When we think about Singapore, we think about the small land size, we think about the greenery. These are some various things that pop to your head the moment you talk about Singapore, right? But of course, other things about Singapore is, of course, we import water from Malaysia. We rely on our neighboring countries a lot for many of our critical resources, food, water, and all these various other resources, right? And of course, our geographic position, we are located at, some people will call it the mouth, I will perhaps say the opening of the Straits of Malacca, right? Where it's a critical trade point that connects the world. So that is, it's a geographical position that I like to say it's a double-edged sword. It's both of privilege as well as of danger because, well, the position is important, but with great power comes great responsibility, right? In terms of managing the maritime space, ensuring that ships are confident in traveling through the Straits of Malacca, of course, and to do business with Singapore as a stopover point, right? Of course, Singapore is a city-state and a maritime nation as we know it today. We're heavily reliant on, maritime trade. But one thing about Singapore perhaps small states, extensive ambitions. I often say this because something that you often hear in Singapore is we like to punch above our own weight. Also, we say we like to, do more. We want to be an important player or player in today's international affairs, right? And even in global affairs and global proceedings. For example, when we think about the South China Sea, even as Singapore does not have territorial claims in the South China Sea, we do still advocate for peace in terms of discussions on the ASEAN-China South China Sea Code of Conduct and all these various measures in place to protect the prevailing rules-based international order, right? Okay, so that's just a little bit of context on Singapore. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about some local stakeholders. And what I mean by stakeholders, before I go in the military, is really, I want to talk about the agencies and the corporations. So the government side and the private side. So of course, first we have the Singapore's Ministry of Defence. Of course, in Singapore, as you can see in the underlined brackets, you will notice Singapore has a tendency to use a lot of abbreviations, acronyms, whatever you want to call it. But yes, Singapore and the Ministry of Defence in Singapore, colloquially known as MINDEF. Well, MINDEF is, in a sense, the backstopper and the customer. It holds this dual position. Why do I say this? Well, MINDEF is the greatest, the government supports Singapore's defence industry, right, in terms of the expansion of the large and some of our very prominent companies, including ST Engineering, right? And of course, they are the biggest customer. What I mean by the customer, basically, it means that, they purchase these military assets. They task these agencies to develop assets through acquisition processes. We look at it, and of course, we are customers of our own agencies, right? And this is a model that most other states follow as well. All right. And of course, the next one, we have the Defense Science and Technology Agency, also known as DSTA. This is a statutory board under MINDEF's ambit. Basically, what DSTA does what we call systems acquisition management and systems integration, systems management, right? So it's, in a sense, it's a research body, but also focuses on acquisition and management, right? And of course, the next party is ST Engineering Land System. Of course, this is a Singaporean public company, an MNC as we know it today. It's like most of you all be already familiar with ST Engineering. It has extensive reach in multiple sectors: shipbuilding, commercial aviation, MROs, even on the land side of the house, land vehicles, so on and so forth, even on the maritime vessels, so on and so forth. It has an extensive reach across, well, I would say it dabbles in perhaps almost a pretty significant portion of the defense sector as we know it today, right? Okay, and the other party, of course, is DSO National Labs, known as DSO, right? Basically, they are kind of the primary research body. They do a lot of research and development, and of course, technology as a solution for some of our national security issues, both internal and external, right? So a lot of things like artificial intelligence, natural language processing, things like that, right? All right, so I've talked about the locals. Let me go to the non-locals. And what I mean by the non-locals, you will see this is a list of companies or corporations, most of which some of you guys might have already seen or are aware of. The commonality of these countries is they all have bases or have strong connections with Singapore, be it having offices, be it having a basis, be it having set up regional centers here in Singapore, right? And of course, Singapore has done business with some of these companies. We talk about the Lockheed Martins, the F-15s, 1635s. We talk about Rheinmetall and the Leopard 2SG, and Saab, of course, the Swedish company, for those who are unfamiliar with, which is part of the mission vessel that was announced just last year, right? So these are some of the non-locals involved in this process. Well, I think this presentation comes at a particularly interesting time. Some of you all might be aware that Singapore is currently in midst of conducting its Singapore Air Show, where the various companies and corporations will bring in their assets. the Chinese C919 is something that's been talked about recently. So we're in quite interesting times, quite timely to talk about some of these non-locals, right? So basically, these non-locals also play a critical part in understanding Singapore's complex defense industry and how you thereafter determine how our industry progresses from here on and out, right? All right. So just with that in mind, let's now talk a little bit about Singapore Armed Forces, right? The Singapore Armed Forces, of course, Singapore's military, just a quick lay of the land, typical conceptual generation to generation transformations. Again, the Singapore Armed Forces was established in 1965. Its national service base called 1967. And in the 1960s, during its initial formation, its priority was on basic defense. So to defend its territorial sovereignty, to defend its interest, to defend its security, basic security, right? Okay, and then we go all the way through the 1970s into the 1980s and 90s, where we go talk about the second generation. So we moved on from basic defense to perhaps the first level of modernization. So modernizing our assets, starting to bring in new technologies, introducing various new vehicles. Some of the predecessors of the vehicles that you see today were introduced in the 1980s and the 1990s. We talk about the SM1, the AMX-13 tanks. From these are just some examples, right? Okay. And then the 2000s, the third generation, where we talk about the new threats, and of course, what you will see in some publications is full spectrum operations. So dealing with the rise of new threats in the 2000s and the 2010s, what we really saw was kind of the rise of terrorism, right? So terrorism and all these various other non-traditional security threats, even when we talk about climate change, all these other things started to enter the equation, right? And of course, the SAF saw its need to perhaps expand its range of operations and to be able to deal with operations across the entirety of the spectrum from peace to war, right? So all these things don't just include the use of kinetic force, but perhaps the use of force for good. When you talk about HADRs, operations other than wars, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief operations, these are things that the SAF is very well known for, right? And of course, 2040, which is again, I put a TBD there to be determined. This is again a future prediction of how the next generation will look like. New assets with a prioritization placed on unmanned assets, as well as a more networked and a more connected fighting force. More on this later, right? All right, so just some plans in motion. You can see these 4 pictures over here. The picture on the left, the top left corner picture that you will see is a picture of an autonomous vehicle. Well, you might think, hey, it looks pretty, it doesn't really look military, right? In a sense, yes, that vehicle is currently being trialed in military camps and other places, but in a sense, well, its military purposes, it's not particularly meant to be a military, an asset of kinetic force. So it's being tested. It transports troopers, it transports SAF personnel across different parts of our camps, right? So that's the one on the left. The one on the right, as you see there, is Singapore's the Maritime Security Unmanned Surface Vessel, in short, MARSEC USV, right? The MARSEC USV is an unmanned surface vessel that was developed that is basically meant to service Singapore's territorial waters. And what I mean by this, it basically means its primary goal is to watch out for Singapore's security in its own territorial waters. So our own internal security out at sea, right? So again, it's an unmanned asset. It's fully unmanned. It's remotely operated. Again, trials are still in the midst of being conducted, but it remains to be seen, right? Okay, the bottom left, I think, not very clear, but it's basically in October 2023, the Singapore Armed Forces officially announced the formation of the Digital Intelligence Service, which is Singapore's 4th service after the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, right? The 4th service essentially is meant to, deal with threats out in the cyberspace, deal with cyber threats. And of course, well, as with all agencies and formations in its infancy, I think, considering we are barely a year into its official formation, I think while a lot of there are a lot of details that will still continue to be ironed out, I think it is a step in the right direction, considering how the digital land space is changing and how threats are appearing even out there in the cyberspace. Even these threats that don't seemingly have a kinetic effect that can end up potentially generating disastrous military consequences, right? Okay, And of course, the bottom right is basically it's a UAV, the Singapore board. And why I purposefully put this UAV out there. Some of you all might be familiar that Singapore recently changed its Air Force chief. I believe he recently announced that there's a delay in the delivery of this particular UAV. Again, these are just some plans that the SAF has currently in place to move towards that next generation Singapore armed forces, right? Okay, and of course, we have to look at, considering how the Singapore Armed Forces operate. Often you can see trends and you can see iterations of the Singapore Armed Forces from looking at its military exercises, right? So this is XFS 23, also known as Exercise Forging Saber 23. This was conducted in the US in Idaho, I believe, in 2023 September. So basically, there are various articles online, but basically, some of the important things that popped up from this military exercise, Singapore tested a whole load of new technologies, including drones for intelligence monitoring, artificial intelligence, robo-dogs, things like that. And of course, the testing of these new technologies and how we can better plan our military doctrines and our fighting, our combat operations, right? In a sense, in some way, we're kind of turbocharging the ODA loop, the decision-making loop in which militaries go through. So in a sense, what we're trying to do is perhaps harness the powers and the capabilities, perhaps infinite capabilities of technologies to increase the speed to which we get to decisions, right? So turbocharging the loop, right? And of course, artificial intelligence is something that the SAF is constantly exploring. It's something that the world continues to explore as well, and it's something that was looked at as well, right? And of course, open source intelligence as well as algorithms. These are things that the SAF continues to prioritize, as well as terrain mapping and target acquisition through the use of drones, mapping technologies, so on and so forth. These are just various technologies that have showed up in some way or another, some of them even before this particular exercise, right? All right. This photo that you see here is the SAF's iteration of what the SAF's visualization of what the next generation will look like in 2040. As you can see, there are various assets that are currently already in place or currently being tested. Of course, the UAV that you saw just now is on the top right, I believe, the Orbiter 4 close-range UAV, right? You can see the various other assets, the F-15s, the F-35s, from which we joined the fighter jet program, right? And of course, all these other various land vehicles, the Hunter Armored Fighting Vehicle, which came up during Singapore's 50th anniversary, right? And of course, Leopard 2 SG main battle tank, the Bionics AFV, which we've had since the 2000s, so on and so forth. These are just some examples of how the SAF will look like, or how the SAF intends itself to look like in 2040, or even when the next generation comes, right? Right. All right. So just some conceptual frameworks, right? With all the details that I've talked about in mind, let's think about some bigger ideas, right? All right. So again, these are 4 things that I'll talk about briefly today. So the first frame is perhaps, I think, a frame that's not just applicable for Singapore, but applicable for all militaries around the world. And when I say this, I mean, perhaps there is a process to be done when the world goes through various cycles of conflicts, various wars. So when these things happen, militaries need to learn. Militaries need to fish, or at least, if I put it in a kind of an unfortunate way, fishing from the ashes of conflict. When we look at conflict, the conduct of war, the conduct of various military operations, and we try to perhaps learn important and critical lessons. And of course, this concept is particularly applicable today, considering what we see in the Russia-Ukraine situation, as well as in the Israel-Hamas situation, right? Okay, then the second thing, technology as a force multiplier. Those of you guys who are somewhat familiar with the Singapore Armed Forces and the Singapore defense industry would probably have heard this one-liner in some way or another. This is a one-liner that is often said not just by policymakers, but by military members, government officials. In a sense, well, put it that way, Singapore, the SAF is set to operate with 30% less manpower by 2030. And this is it's an unfortunate reality of perhaps falling birth rates. There are various other structural considerations in mind. But essentially, well, perhaps we need to use technology to overcome some of our own domestic structural limitations, right? So in this case, you'll often hear this adage being thrown around a lot, Right. And of course, the next thing, commercial military cooperation. This is something that was also seen in Exercise 14 Sabre 2023, when you saw certain commercial drone assets being deployed, when looked at or thought about for military purposes as well. And this is not just this is not new. Of course, it's not something that's popped up recently. It's something that's been, I would say, ongoing for quite a while, right? And of course, the last thing is the mothership concept. Some of you guys might not be familiar with this, but I'll talk more about it later. But essentially, think of it that way. When we try to bring in technology, when we try to combine technology with our current military setup, how can we perhaps fuse this technology better and become a more networked and a more connected fighting force across the services, right? All right. So first thing, learning difficult lessons. I think we have to deal with structural realities. And what I mean by structural realities, like I talked about just now, Singapore's lack of land space, hinterland, all of those things, right? And of course, drones and asymmetric costs, I think this is the biggest lesson, perhaps, that a lot of militaries are taking away from the Russia-Ukraine situation in terms of how a $30,000 drone that you can make from a 3D printing machine is destroying a $5, $7, $10 million tank out there, right? And of course, enduring concepts of conventional war. When we think about Ukraine and Russia, at the end of the day, the land warfare, similar concepts that we saw in World War I and World War II still show up today. So there are some concepts that still apply in today's warfighting arena, right? And of course, the next point, building upwards, outwards, and downwards. This point connects to the point of structural realities, where perhaps at the end of the day, we are trying to overcome some of these things, be it through building taller buildings, be it through building outwards in terms of trying to expand our coastlines, as well as downwards. When we talk about downwards, perhaps the model that people are looking at is perhaps the issue of Hamas and the issue of the tunnels, right? And of course, that links to my next point, which is on the preparation for urban warfare. Singapore is, of course, set to provide more training facilities for the SAF to train in urban warfighting capabilities, right? In the essence of time, I'll just quickly graze through. All right, just one. This is really my last key slide on the mothership concept. At the end of the day, the mothership concept basically means this: having a centralized command tower to command your assets, both manned and unmanned. So if I put it in kind of tongue-in-cheek terms, the mobile mother, right? Having an asset to oversee the entire command structure and deployment of both manned and unmanned assets. And of course, this requires is a cross-service command and control system, and you need to be able to speak the same language across your various vehicles. This is particularly difficult when you think about trying to combine local assets with assets bought from other countries, right? And thereafter, you need to also bring in your intelligence. You need to be able to process data and make sense of these data to convert it into actionable intelligence, right? And of course, when I talk about modular variants, you can see the bottom photo on the bottom right photo there. That looks like, well, a typical 5-tonner or typical lorry. But essentially, that vehicle there is Singapore's iteration of what we like to call the mobile medical unit that can be opened up and kind of turned similar to how a transformer works, being opened up and transformed into a medical base or mobile medical base for our military out at war, right? So things like that. These are just some concepts to think about. And this mothership concept is something that has been talked about, not just from authorities, but also by scholars alike. All right. So prospects, ground rules, it doesn't just end after the purchase, because you need to be able to implement these things into your fighting setup, right? And of course, increased regional cooperation can alleviate acquisition difficulties. I think this is particularly critical. I think considering today's time, some of the previous speakers have also talked about how we can perhaps cooperate with one another. But of course, that requires a lot more communication on intellectual property rights, technology transfer, overcoming the typical security dilemma, international relations, things like that. So the ground rules, perhaps dream big, but don't jump the gun, meaning as we continue to see new technologies emerge today, we'll think, oh, we want to be the first. We want to be the first runner. We want to successfully test a certain technology and bring it into our military. But again, if you jump the gun, you might end up affecting your military's combat readiness in times to come. All right. Okay, so really this is my summary slide. Multiple regional flashpoints like I talked about just now. And at the end of the day, well, considering the polarization in which we see today, perhaps peace is somewhat of a privilege, not really a given, right? And as a region, as Southeast Asia, how can we perhaps outrun the security dilemma? How can we get through some of these logistical or intellectual hooplas? And how can we perhaps come together as a region to perhaps strengthen our defense connections, all right? And how can ASEAN and some of these other regional organizations thereafter feature in this particular equation? Beyond ASEAN even, when we go up into Asia, into East Asia, and into Asia Pacific as an entire region. And of course, the last point I think is particularly important. How can you fuse new technologies with old technologies and old assets, right? All right, so again, potential steps, more regional exchanges. Perhaps we need to take a lesson from the books of the powers. And perhaps the last thing is perhaps overcoming the sensitivities of defense, like I talked about. Again, I've tried to share as much as I can inside this 20 minutes. Looking forward to some interesting questions. Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you for the insightful presentation, Mr. Lim. If I may summarize, Mr. Lim emphasizes that just like other countries, Singapore's defense industry ecosystem consists of many local and foreign stakeholders. There are a number of benefits if Asia has its own regional defense industry cooperation. However, there are several challenges to be aware of, such as differences in technology adoption levels. Asian nations can learn from other regions, such as the European Union, and start the initiative by intensifying regional exchanges. All right, with the last presentation from Mr. Lim earlier, we will now enter the Q&A session, which will be moderated by my colleague, Iqbal. You may begin the session, Iqbal.
All right. Thank you, Nia, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Iqbal Bagus Alfiansyah. I'm a research analyst at Semar Sentinel Indonesia. I'll be moderating this afternoon's questions and answer sessions. We have gathered questions from participants compiled through our registration form, Zoom chat box, and YouTube live chat. So we will have at least 2 sessions as time permits, and I will read 2 questions in each session, followed by our speakers taking turns to provide their answers. All right, for the first session, we have 2 questions. The first one is from Bimantara Widaya Jala from the Indonesian Ministry of Finance. Since the defense sector is closely tied to secrecy and confidentiality, how can this affect the opportunity to develop joint defense projects or collaboration in Southeast Asia? And the second question is from Karina, Indonesian civil servant. Considering the goal of establishing regional defense industry cooperation, should ASEAN nations give preference to arms import offers from outside the region that promote local production as it boosts self-sufficiency and lays the groundwork that can be used for regional development, such as South Korea's aerospace industry, which provides local FA-50 assembly to Malaysia, or French naval group, which offers local production to Indonesia and local maintenance facilities to the Philippines? All right, for these first 2 questions, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Kuri. And since you had problems with your connections, maybe you can also provide some closing statements or concluding remarks with your presentation, please.
Thank you, Mas Iqbal. Apologies for the disconnection of the Asia. Okay, allow me to continue with my last slides. Yeah. For Indonesian defense industry, the challenges ahead is to integrate the industry into the global supply chain. And I think this is also the objective of other defense industry in the region. And one of the most successful, especially Singapore, with focusing on the niche and subcomponents, yeah, instead of focusing on the large platforms. So for Indonesia, we have participated in global supply chains for limited technology. Yeah, for example, the civil airplane. Yeah, but not all of the defense equipment actually open to global supply chain. Yeah, for aircraft, the supply chain is very much globalized. Yeah, but not so for example, the land system. Right? And Indonesia currently maintain high dependencies on components. Yeah, so although Indonesia has managed to produce lots of defense equipment, but the level of local content is still moderate to low. And the third thing I would like to highlight here is that Indonesia has actually tried to increase the level of integration to supply chain, the global supply chains by providing the cooperation with different suppliers. For example, Indonesia was the first buyer of this Korea's training aircraft, and now South Korean have been exporting their training aircraft to many regions, including Europe, but it is actually Vietnam who received investment in aircraft coming in. Indonesia was also the first buyer of the Dutch Sigma Corvette, for example, which has been exported to other countries, but it is again Vietnam who got the share for the export. So I think I would just stop there, and I will focus on addressing the questions. We have two different questions. The first is about transparency. I would like to say that yes, of course, transparency has a limitation in defense, and when it comes to defense procurement, it is actually not tightly regulated as other government procurements of goods and services. It is excluded from the WTO government procurement regulations because it is considered under national security. So we still have a level of sovereignty in deciding about our defense procurement. But it is important for Southeast Asian countries actually to have a certain level of transparency. And if you read the reports for Transparency International about the Defense Integrity Index, which also comprises some of the Southeast Asian countries, and you see that most of Southeast Asian countries are actually considered as high risk in terms of procurement, corruption, corruption risk in procurement. And we are notorious for lack of transparency and accountability in defense studying. And Singapore is no exception this year. So it is I think Southeast Asian countries here uphold the sovereignty issues. This also means that each country will not going to be more transparent anytime soon. But I think it is time for us to devise a mechanism to among Southeast Asian countries with defense industries to start having a level of transparency, to inform each other of the things that we will buy for the next decades. Not just inform when we already have the contract signed, but inform each other with what we plan to buy in the future, 10, 15, 20 years. This also forces each country to be more mindful and professional in the conduct of defense planning. Otherwise, it will be difficult to think about partnerships, because partnership means that first you need trust, and you cannot trust if you cannot verify, if you don't know what your neighbors will purchase. And the second, you need to have data for the purpose of investment. You need to know the commonalities of our investment, because the bigger the investment, the smaller the burden that you can absorb. So I think that that is all for the first question. The second question is about whether we should prioritize arms imports or buying from domestic industry. If I'm not mistaken, that's the question. So I think we need to acknowledge that most of Southeast Asian countries defense industrial level is still rudimentary, meaning that we don't really have the capability to produce independently our defense systems. And if we do, if we have dependencies over the component or subcomponents. And so what we need is actually to be selective in what weapon systems that we can build domestically, and what we can do through partnerships with Asian countries, yeah, and what we can develop with partners from outside the region. Yeah, I think, for example, the munition industry is very important for each country. Yeah, we learned from the Ukraine war. Yeah, that the needs of munitions is very high. Yeah, even Europe cannot catch up with the requirements of the Ukraine war. So that is the most the thing that we have to have in our own national defense industry. But for others, technology, for example, like UAV, which is also in demand for modern war, yeah, we can develop the dual use industries because most of the technology actually comes from commercial industries rather than defense industries. Yeah. So this we could partners with private sectors from national and regional companies. Yeah. Um, and also for emerging technologies, yeah, for example, AI, yeah, I think this is the issue that we might not agree in ASEAN because we have tendency of preference, yeah, to which sort of technology, the Western or the Eastern. Yeah. But I think that the Asia needs to revitalize the Asian Defense Industrial Council, yeah, to start thinking about this emerging technology issues, yeah, so that when we decided to adopt such technology, it won't bring instability to the region, and instead it will strengthen, yeah, our defense. Yeah. I think that's all, Mas. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Kuri, for your answer. And then I invite Mr. Rusli to come up with the answers, please. I'm sorry, you're still muted. Yeah.
Thank you. I did not realize that I was on mute. Thank you very much, Mas Iqbal, for this opportunity to respond to the question. Okay, let me just make myself clear to everyone that I'm not a scholar in international relations or defense. I'm actually an international law researcher. My area is law of the sea. So, to respond to the two questions that have been put forward by our learned listeners, I would like to answer that from the purview of the importance of nations to invest in defense to protect the sovereignty of our nation. If you remember the slides that I've shared with everyone earlier during my presentation, the area that Malaysia is claiming, I'm talking from the purview of Malaysia as a Malaysian and as a Malaysian researcher, the area that Malaysia is claiming in the South China Sea that overlaps with China, the maritime area is even bigger, might be of equal size or might be bigger than the size of the Malaysian state of Sarawak and Sabah. Sarawak itself is bigger than the whole peninsula. I think almost the same size. So if we do not invest on matters pertaining to defense, so how are we going to take care of to make sure that our sovereignty is preserved in a way that under international law, it is really important for nations to show effective control over the area that they claim sovereignty upon. Okay, this has been mentioned clearly in Pedra Branca case and also in Sipadan Ligitan, where effective control of certain area is one of the most important issues or one of the most important elements of showing sovereignty. Okay, so if let's say you do not have you are a nation is unable to show military presence in an area that you are claiming, so one way or another, then it is a show of acquiescence on the other claimant that that area belongs to them because we cannot show our presence. So that's why, as far as defense matters pertaining to defense are concerned, I believe investment should be made, particularly not only on Malaysia, other states as well. And then I do believe that these issues on defense and finance is sensitive. So that's why we have to go back to academics. We have academics to do research on matters pertaining to, maybe we do not have to do research on sensitive matters, but at least we can actually understand what are the issues to be dealt with. Like, for instance, I'm doing issues pertaining to the law of the sea. So we can see that some issues pertaining to sovereignty can be really sensitive, but some issues pertaining to the same topic can be turned into something that we can discuss academically, right? So when we can discuss academically, then I suppose then it will not be entirely contentious. We can share this information. Like we have our friends from BINUS. I went to BINUS back in 2016. It's an awesome university. RSIS, I was there, I think 2 years ago. And so when we have this, medium to share information, maybe not sensitive issue or maybe contentious issue, at least we can learn. We can learn from each other. That's the least, maybe something that we can work upon, right? And then what else? The sensitive issue and how to move forward. Maybe our friend from Singapore have more. He knows more on our learned friend from Singapore. I think he knows more on matters pertaining to defense because from his presentation, I think that is his niche area. But in my opinion, for us to move forward, not only collaboration, I think as far as Malaysia is concerned, we have also to put the proper people at the proper place. I think our neighbors here, we have friends from Indonesia, we have friends from the Philippines and Singapore. Malaysian political arena has been like a Indonesian drama of sinetron. It takes like 100 episodes and never finishes. Okay, so I still remember this was a big blunder done by our former Minister of Defense at that time in 2019 in Singapore, where he actually admit that Malaysia has weaknesses, particularly on matters of defense. Okay, if I say this, then it will not be entirely bad because I'm an academic. Whatever I say might not be entirely carry much weight, but he was the Minister of Defense. So most probably, I think, as far as Malaysia is concerned, we should stop to focus, stop politicking too much, and putting people, the correct people at the correct place so that we can get the job done. We have changed prime minister for 5 times over the past 2 years. I think we have created a record for ourselves. None of other Southeast Asian nations have managed to do that. So in my opinion, in order for us to move forward is to have a stable political environment in the country. Number one. Number two, we have to learn from each other. Okay, we have to learn from each other. If not contentious matter, we can learn something, we can put it from an academic discussion perspective. And number three, collaboration. And Semar Sentinel has been doing a good job in making this a culture whereby we learn from each other. So I think that's it from me. I have no other issues to discuss in responding to the questions that have been put forward. So I'm passing the floor back to Iqbal. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Hasmi. So next up, we will have Mr. Espenya to answer the questions, please.
Yeah, a small request from you, Iqbal. Would you like to, can you send the questions because I have not been able to digest it well.
Okay. Would you
Yeah.
like me to read it or just send it to you?
You can read it. Okay.
Okay. All right, I'm going to read the question again. So the first question is, since the defense sector is closely tied to secrecy and confidentiality, how can this affect the opportunity to develop joint defense projects or collaborations in Southeast Asia? And then the second question, should ASEAN nations give preference to arms import offers from outside the region that promote local production as it may boost self-sufficiency and lays the groundwork that can be used for regional development?
Yeah. Okay. I think these two questions are actually twin questions, if you would observe carefully. Now, with respect to the question of secrecy, I don't think the secrecy is much of a problem because it's less of a problem in a sense that you need to discuss the greater elephant in the room, and that is why do you want to integrate your systems, or why do you want to collaborate on these areas? I think secrecy is an accepted variable, right? It's an accepted variable that you have to discuss together. And our dear friend from Malaysia discussed it very well. That collaboration, it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3 to discuss technology transfer, intellectual property rights, right? So my perspective is that secrecy is nothing of a. It's a non-controversial. It's a non-starter actually. What we need to discuss is that we have to lay down what we want to to collaborate regarding on a particular defense item. I think that's the greater concern, right? That's my point, to put it shortly. And the other concern is that the idea that you want to import, I think it's nice. You want to import on what? Not necessarily on every defense system. That is why the main, the main concern here is that you have to set the bar. What do you want to niche, and then what do you want others to provide something for you? In order to build this particular defense item, because ship hulls, as I mentioned in my presentation, perhaps the Philippines can do the niching on the hull system. It could stimulate, development for our employment. We need this, but at the same time, we need the help of uh, this im- this non-Southeast Asian defense industries, right? I think I think that's the point, right? You let the importers, non-Southeast Asian importers, come here, discuss what we want them to provide in our defense item, and then let us, the competent people with the right politics in the mixture. That's where you talk about what particular deliverables, what you want their defense industries to have and your defense industries to have. I think that's the point. But at the same time, the caveat is that, as I mentioned, is that the idea of the economies of scale. That's always the one of the pressing problems here. Is that once the Southeast Asian, I think at least for the Filipino perspective here, is that our problem is that we haven't been incentivized compared to Singapore. Actually, compared to Singapore, we haven't been incentivized to think about strategic industries related to defense. But I think that's the 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 good timing here that we need to discuss this because our political setting is on the right mood to talk about these things. But my problem is that if we won't be able to be blunt about we are facing issues. We don't trust you enough, right? We don't trust you that for instance, some of my friends were saying, I don't trust Singaporean systems because they haven't been, experienced in a large scale war. Although I would not say that kind of, I won't put that bluntly, but that's the fact that we need low level discussions like this in order to overcome these issues of mistrust, because mistrust has something to do with the concerns of secrecy. But again, that's not the main concern. Why do you want to address all this collaboration? I think I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Espina, for the answer. All right. For now, we will hear from Mr. Lim for the answers. You may have the
All right. All right. I mean, thank you to all of you guys for talking about Singapore in a good light. I mean, as Singaporean, it's good news for me, right? But just a little bit on some of the things. I think these two questions, like some of the panelists have mentioned, yes, they are connected together in some ways. Okay. Before I talk about perhaps breaking the secrecy or the opaqueness of the defense industry, just a little bit on perhaps when we talk about Singapore's defense industry. I believe in the CIPRI database for 2022, I believe ST Engineering is 55th. I believe we are top in Southeast Asia, but I believe there are various other companies ahead of us, including many notable Chinese companies, as well as Hanwha, who I believe is in the 48 or 43, correct me if I'm wrong. So again, it's a testament to perhaps how ST Engineering has successfully positioned itself in the region. Of course, thereafter, how we look abroad and how perhaps we can encourage more foreign entities or more other states from outside the region to purchase assets from ST Engineering. That's another separate discussion entirely, right? But again, to some of the points, I think the reality is this. The last war that Singapore has fought was perhaps the battle for Singapore, the Malayan campaign in World War in World War II, right? And that's very far back. So I think it is a very fair criticism as to, I wouldn't say criticism, more of a question as to the efficacy of assets, which is why, as you guys will all know, President Zelensky has put out messages saying, you know, come to Ukraine. Ukraine is perhaps the perfect place to test some of your weapons and your assets, right? But that speaks to perhaps, I think, while he's of course trying to secure his own security considerations, that speaks to perhaps his recognition and the world's recognition of the need to test your assets. If you don't put your assets out there to test, I won't even say in combat situations, but more of in actual, perhaps, situations that can mimic war fighting. So, for example, because of Singapore's lack of land space, we conduct most of our critical military exercises overseas. You know, Taiwan, Germany. This is just some places with which we conduct our military exercises. So, I think through these military tests, through these trials, exercises, as with Exercise Forging Saber in 2023, like I talked about, through these things, you can thereafter perhaps gain a better idea of how your assets will perform. But again, the solution is not to perhaps, I think, you know, trying to make sure your assets are battle tested. The solution is not to enter battle. That's irrational, right? So that's the trap that perhaps all militaries, or I won't say that's a problem that's not just Singapore, look, that's a problem for all militaries around the world to think about, right? Okay, back on the two questions that was raised, I think those are very great questions. I think the very first thing, which is on the concept of secrecy and the opaqueness of the defense industry, as so I would say, I think it is, well, yes, it is a non-starter. I agree with that first line. But at the same time, I think it is an inevitable reality of things. Even if two states have extremely cordial relations, almost no territorial disputes or any forms of disputes, at the end of the day, well, the sensitivities of military acquisitions, combat, combined arms training, your military doctrines, your assets, thereafter require, or I should say necessitate communications or perhaps sharing of information up to a certain level, right? Where do you draw that gray line? Where do you draw that line? Where do you draw that line? And perhaps everything below, perhaps sharing becomes more open. Everything above, sharing becomes slightly harder or slightly difficult, right? I think that line is unclear and particularly difficult to draw. And I think when we talk about Southeast Asia specifically, I think that line has room to be drawn clearer. And because, well, in Southeast Asia, well, we have various kinds of, I would say, small, perhaps, disputes with one another. But, well, if we remove perhaps some of the prevailing sensitive situations when we talk about Myanmar and some of these other situations, well, the region is largely a very interconnected region, a very interreliant region. And thereafter, that gives you space to bring that line higher up, perhaps. Of course, you still have to draw a line at a certain point, right? So I think it is up to perhaps not just the militaries, but for defense corporations to come together, perhaps for to conduct, tech exchanges, communications, conferences on how some of these technologies are being brought in, as well as for militaries to engage with one another. I think one room in which the region can do better, perhaps, is to engage in what we call more combined arm exercises, combined arms. So by combined arms, well, I don't own the same assets as you, for example. I might not own the same fighter jet, the same littoral vessel, the same military fighting asset as you. But we can explore how we can operate these assets together with our manned military. How can we fight? How can we perhaps improve our doctrines to fight as one combined military? That doesn't require perhaps as much of a high line, like I talked about just now, as compared to some of the things that might enter sensitive, the area of sensitivities. Right. This links to the second question. The second question on, region priorities for the region, perhaps beneficial agreements for the region, as well as companies who want to come in, and local production. I think the word local production sounds simple, difficult to execute. Why do I say this? The US, for example, the US is one of the largest, one of the greatest exporters of their military assets. But the US does have a lot of policies in place to prevent, be the leaking of secrets, or in a sense, they have a lot of control over what we would call technology transfer. The transfer of technology, the transfer of property rights, intellectual property rights, as well as, how to operationalize and use some of these assets. All right. But again, this is a standard that the US has perhaps set, but it's a standard that perhaps initially deemed as a non-negotiable, I would say in the 2000s, but it's something that you will see in the 2010s and the 2020s largely changing. Think about South Korea, for example. I think it was mentioned South Korea, right? Think about South Korea and Hanwha. Well, their deal with Poland was it's a very large one. It's a deal that continues on till today. But I think people forget one important thing. The allure of South Korean program to Poland does not just come from South Korea's military's capabilities, their ability to fulfill the acquisition on tight timelines, but also involves local production and technology transfer. Because through that, the asset can be produced in Poland itself. The local authorities have kind of a better bird's eye view over the entire production process. And from there on, you gain a better understanding of the asset, and you are able to better fuse the asset into pre-existing warfighting doctrines. I think this is the critical point that people forget. But again, does it mean that, South Korea is the model today? Can we replicate a model that South Korea has done for Southeast Asia? Well, perhaps. But I think it starts with more baseline communication first. I think all of us will perhaps agree that defense cooperation in the region till today, somewhat rudimentary. I would say somewhat rudimentary, with a lot of disclaimers here, somewhat rudimentary. Well, there is a lot of room for improvement. Before we can get to the point where perhaps South Korea's openness in terms of technology transfer, I think it starts with basic conversations. When you get basic conversations going, thereafter, you can perhaps develop room for more discussions on local transfers and local technologies. But I think there is room, there is potential, but the region has to get things started, right? Yeah, that's all from me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lim. So thank you for your answers. We are moving on to the last two questions. Actually, the next question also mentioned transfer of technology. So first, we have a question from Julie from an Indonesian defense industry, who's asking, how should Southeast Asian countries capitalize on ongoing or potential TOT or transfer of technology programs for major weapon systems to align with their specific needs, especially in light of different financial capabilities? And then we have the second question from Ariel Vincent Lorente from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, who's asking, how can the Philippines and maybe other Southeast Asian countries too develop its defense industry in the context of not being able to afford many military equipment? And how can the Philippines and yes, other Southeast Asian countries too can achieve this goal in the foreseeable future? All right, so first I invite Mr. Espeña to answer these two questions.
I thought I was able to avoid that question. Apparently, it's the Philippines. All right. These are from the Philippine perspective. It's a simple question, but it's a difficult question, right? Considering the long-standing strategic culture of this country, we've been aversive about defense industries, right? So regarding technology, am I gonna answer the two questions at the same time, or?
Yes, feel free to do so. Yeah, just do it in the way you like.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I'll answer the second question, perhaps first. The problem regarding the AFP modernization is that there has been a misconstrued understanding of what comprises capabilities, right? Which leads us to misnomers like you just give in more money, right? It's like a basic principle of economics. If you want to be rich, you just give more money, more money, more money. That's not how defense economics works. That's the large misnomer of our elites in this country, which provided a very bad not so conducive environment to talk about linking all these private sectors within the country and outside the country. So So that is the premise. That's the premise of my point here. Is that so I think the question is actually found in my proposal. Yeah, the feasible step is that we have to identify selective sufficiency, because not only we would be addressing the the economy of scale, it also provides us with the ability to niche. What do we want to niche in the global defense market? We have to understand the Philippines can't compete uh, with Lockheed Martin, yeah, right? So it's the top one as of 2024. We cannot be self-sustainable, let alone be like S&T engineering, right? So let's leave it at that. So if you want to spur economic growth using defense industries, you have to identify which of these systems we want to niche within the global supply chain. That's the key, I think, in my humble opinion, for the Philippines to tap into the to get itself into the woods. So which leads me to address the second question regarding transfer of technology. Once you're able to identify what you want to niche, then there's the idea that there's a cautiously optimistic about this. There's a probable idea that you might be able to tell other defense industries what you want your system, the niche system, to be linked in that particular item of this global supply chain. The reason I think why there hasn't been there has been a deficit of trust regarding the transfer of technologies is because, at least from the Philippine perspective, is that we are assuming that we're going to embrace all of the parts of the global supply chain, right? We have to be realistic here. We want to defend our country, and we want to be logistically sustainable in an event of war, and to do that you have to learn from the you have to learn from this stark reality in you. Think is that, number one, we cannot own all of the systems. We need external providers, but at the same time, the West also expect Ukraine to at least master. But now they cannot master. Although perhaps they can master in the future. I don't know. But what's happened in Ukraine is that they were able to master a particular niche in the system. That's right, and that's the lesson that we need to take note of in regard to the Indo-Pacific region, or at least Southeast Asia, or in the Philippine perspective. So, to summarize, we can spur development, but identify what you want to niche, because that's the best way for you to participate in the larger woods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that was an insight from the Philippines. And how about the other countries? In that case, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Rusli to give an answer, please.
I think Joshua has taken most of my answers. I actually share his view. I share the same view as what he has already put forward during a while ago. Maybe I can add a bit. Perhaps we should, in order to move forward, there is a saying that in order for us to move forward, we have to at least look back a bit, learn from history. And that's why during my presentation, I started off with history, that to show to the audience that before the coming of the European colonizers, we are already a nation state. We are already a nation state that had good relationship with bigger neighbors, particularly China and India at that time. And that was the one, having this good relationship was one of the key to ensuring the sovereignty of the kingdoms within Southeast Asia to be preserved. So having good relationship is obviously a key. And secondly, in order for us to move forward, we have to invest. Nations have to invest on not only on on the assets, but we have to also invest on human resource, right? In order for nations to move forward, human resource and infrastructure must go hand in hand. And in this particular issue, we are talking about defense. So both have to go hand in hand, a human resource and also the technology itself. So what's the use of having technology, but having people not be able to use it? So it will be, at the end of the day, it will prove in vain. So I believe we have to look back at history, learn from mistakes of the past, and secondly, get more people educated at the same time, doing research and development and so on. And by having that, only that we can move forward towards becoming nations that, for instance, South Korea used to be ravaged by war, but they were colonized not only by Japan, they were ruled momentarily by the United States and Soviet Union. But look at where they are now. So if they can do it, so can Southeast Asian nations. So I think that's all from me. I'm passing the floor back to you, Iqbal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rusli. And now we will now hear from Mr. Thomas to provide that answer, please.
All right. I mean, this again, the question is a continuation of the theme of the transfer of technology. And I think continuing on the short story from which I shared just now, I think one important thing for all, perhaps observers of the defense industry as well as people in the defense industry is perhaps, well, the transfer of technology sounds perhaps it can sound quite simplistic. All I need to do is tell you how to build a product. All I need to do is tell you how to operate the product, and all I need to do is to give you the parts. But again, the execution of this becomes profoundly difficult. Why? Because, well, what if your own military uses the particular asset from which it's being exported, right? Well, does that allow a potential adversary to identify your weakness in your particular vehicle or in your particular asset? And these are realities that all states need to face. And this problem causes defense policymakers to fall into, the security dilemma trap, as we know in international relations, right? So it is perhaps more fitting if I talk really about the use, when we talk about Singapore specifically, for example, just taking a lead from Singapore, when I think for ST Engineering, for example, yes, it is a regional power, but yes, I think inside the defense industry, but I think, well, every company has room to grow. Every company has its own problems. Every company has its own quirks, all right? But, well, when we think about typical defense corporations, usually, well, I tend to see it two ways. For example, a defense corporation is usually very successful. One, if it has an option that far exceeds all other options on the market. Meaning I have an asset that I have a particular artillery asset that far exceeds all other artillery assets available. Thereafter, because I have the best asset in town, people will look for me. That is the first way. Or the second way, I have a wide enough variety of resources such that I can perhaps generate interconnectivity, generate interdependence, and generate significant monetary returns by increased exchanges with, partners, allies, and so be it. In a sense, when you think about some of the industries, I think from the Philippines perspective, I think it is very clear. Well, if my industry doesn't have the economic strength, as the question mentioned, if my industry doesn't have the economic strength and the wealth to keep up with some of these major players, Lockheed Martin, Rheinmetall, Hanwha recently, if I cannot keep up with them, I need to carve out a space, right? I need to be able to carve out somewhere in which I can operate, perhaps not on a global scale. We start from a regional scale, perhaps. What can I offer to the region? What can I offer to a select number of states, for example? In Singapore, so most of y'all will have noticed recently that I think recently a Singapore commercial company signed a drone agreement with other countries outside of Singapore. I believe France. I can't remember who else. Can't remember the exact details at this point. But that speaks to perhaps, well, a small company kind of carving out its own space and its own niche, in this case in the drone market, for example. It captured on, a rising market opportunity that people have seen because of the ongoing wars, be it the Israel-Hamas situation or the Russia-Ukraine war, right? So with that in mind, I think what this requires is for all companies and all corporations to perhaps follow the trends very closely. Why do I say this? A lot of companies in the middle of, be it fulfilling other agreements, chasing other vehicles, chasing technological progress. We fail to follow trends, but these trends, even without the wars that we see today, continue to update on a day-by-day basis. And by doing this, that perhaps allows you to stay somewhat ahead of the curve or to find an entrance into a market that is already very saturated. Think about South Korea, for example. I think South Korea is the perfect case study for this. Well, they found an opportunity. They saw a Europe, an increasingly securitized and increasingly tensioned Europe, and they found an opportunity to enter the market. They saw a chance because, well, most of the other primary arms providers were suffering with issues at that point of time. The US had delivery timelines for other players such as Taiwan, Ukraine situation. Germany, of course, its own defense industry has faced some issues, and Russia, of course, they are involved in the war, right? So with all these major players having various structural problems, well, South Korea and Hanwha saw a chance to enter, and they attacked the gap. They punched the gap, or so we say. And that turned out well for them. Well, perhaps for Southeast Asia, it's about punching that gap. It's about finding that next gap to punch in. And I think this is a logic that applies not just for Singapore and not just for ST Engineering, but for everybody else in the region in terms of perhaps trying to secure a position in the negotiation table when we talk about the defense industry today. Right, that's all from me. Thanks, Iqbal.
Thank you, Thomas. All right, so finally, we will have Ms. Kuri to provide an answer, please.
Well, I remember a decade ago, there was an idea to have ASEAN collaboration on land systems, and it was cancelled. From Indonesian side, it was because an analysis, on the potential work share from that collaboration is not advantageous for Indonesia. Instead, Singapore and Thailand was predicted to be the major winner of that collaboration, which shows that among all the ASEAN countries with defense industries, our competitiveness are not at the same level. And I imagine that nowadays, if we to pursue it, similar collaboration, Vietnam will be among the major winners as well. So for me, there are some conditions if you want to capitalize the transfer of technology from joint procurement here. As I said before, the Associate Asian countries, we have different contexts, different drivers, and different approach to procurement. But we can start to, for example, join our maintenance or join our procurement, of the Russian technology, because with Thomas said that with Russian being busy with Ukraine war, it's no longer able to provide service for their customers abroad. So we are left to ourselves how to maintain, and to whether to replace such technology. And we have identified commonalities among several ASEAN countries, which means there are potential for a joint procurement. However, we also need to be transparent with each other. What are our modernization plan? Because without that, it's difficult to analyze the demand investment we are going to make. The second is that we also need commitment to the budget, which is very difficult to have in Southeast Asia. We always have fluctuating defense budget, which is not constructive for the defense industry, because they need certainty. They need to be confident that the government will always be there for them to support their long-term investment. The third would be the choice of partners. I agree with Thomas. Yes, we might need to consider, for example, South Korea. But then again, South Korea is not the first tier, not the innovator of technology. So we also need to secure license from the original innovators, such as the US. And then this also happened to India, which have scored lots of export to this region, with the recent settlement made by Philippines for the BrahMos, and then the same has been offered to Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia. But again, India doesn't have the technology. So if we choose to partner with innovator countries, yeah, then you have to deal with the complications of having to secure the license, yeah, from the countries. And the fourth thing is return to the example that I given earlier. If a joint procurement will ensure, then we have to agree on the work share, whether it will be competitive basis, meaning that the work share for the production is up to the competitiveness level of each industry, or you're going to have to just return, yeah, which is probably more fair for those with less competitiveness, yeah. And I think this is the questions that always brought up, whether it's between the US and Europe, or with or among the European countries when they have collaboration here. So those are the five preconditions. Yeah, if you so this is going to one is capitalize technology, but of course, at the end of the day, the questions will be real. So this question, countries agree on the choice of partners and the origin of technology, because this also has close relations with our foreign policy. At the moment, we can see that most of Southeast Asian countries choose the hedging policies. Yeah, we try not to be close to either the powers, yeah, China or the US. Yeah, but in the future, yeah, whether this will change and how it will affect, yes, the efforts to collaborate, yeah, in procurement, yeah, we will see. I think that's all about me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Guri, and speakers. Thank you very much for your answers. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our questions and answer sessions today. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we are unable to accommodate all questions from our participants. And we would like to say thank you for your participation and the valuable insights provided by our speakers during the questions and answer sessions. And I will give the floor back to Nia.
All right, thank you, Iqbal, and thank you to all of our speakers today for delivering such insightful presentations. We also extend our gratitude to our wonderful audience for joining us today. For those interested in further discussions on defense issues or updates on future webinars, please follow our social medias on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. You can also access our previous webinars on our YouTube channel. Also, for any references to these webinar discussions, including screenshots, live tweet, or social media posts, we kindly request that you contact us beforehand through email at inquiry@semarsentinel.com. All right, lastly, we wish you all to stay safe, stay healthy, and see you at our next events. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Terima kasih.
Thank
Terima kasih.
you.
Thank you.